Last time on the Mounty Presents, I talked about Superman for like 7 minutes. And now the continuation. Freaking buzzkill. In my previous video, I talked about why I like Superman. But there's one thing that I didn't talk about in that video, and today, I'm gonna talk about it. You already looked at the title, so I'm not even gonna bother with the build-up. This is Superman Doomsday, and it is one of the worst Superman stories / movies I have ever freaking seen. But before I tear it a new asshole, let's quickly go over the history. This movie is an adaptation of a storyline from the 90s that I would like to point out was a storyline thought up at the last minute because a storyline where Lois and Superman get married in the comics was put on hold and released in 2007 on home media. So why do I consider this one of the worst stories about the Man of Steel? Well, let's find out. So our story begins with Lex Luthor talking about Superman and how people worship him as a god before adding that there comes a time when even gods must die. Hey, remember the last video where I talked about Superman not considering himself a god and just doing the right things because it's the right thing to do in a lot of the good stories? Yeah, we're starting off on a high note with this movie, aren't we? Not too long after this scene, we cut to LexCorp trying to uncover means of snubbing Superman until they find Doomsday's containment vessel, and it's apparently fragile enough for a laser to puncture it because after a warning message, it breaks free and kills everybody in the area. Yep, we're 10 minutes into this movie and Doomsday's released. Well, they must have a lot of time dedicated to this guy clearly, especially given how it's titled after him and all. What do you mean he dies before the halfway point? Yep, this bland character who's all about destruction and crap that this movie is titled around dies 26 minutes into this 75-minute film. And yes, I know he died in the first act of the Death and Return of Superman storyline, but that still doesn't excuse him dying really early in this fucking movie. Now what are they gonna do? Oh, right, they pull the clown out of the movie and combine two stories into one. Except instead of rushing the second story, Superman Doomsday decides to rush through the first story just to get to the parts where they bring Superman back from his quote-unquote coma. So instead of having two movies that could have adapted both parts of the original storyline separately and at a better pacing, we instead have one movie that drastically compresses both stories in an attempt that can be best described as fitting a square peg into a round hole. And it's not like the second part of the story is adapted all that well either. So instead of having the four Superman like the actual storyline did, we instead have one Superman who's all about protecting Metropolis under Luthor's hand at first, and then his own after he finds a way to gain independence. Which makes the later scene funnier in hindsight, since he's talking about how bad it is to have evil Superman clones Lex made and destroys them, and yet he's basically just as bad as those clones. I guess when Lex was making this guy, he forgot to program self-awareness. Oh yeah, Lex made this clone of Superman. It's the villain for the rest of the movie, by the way. You know, we could have just had Lex be the main bad guy in all this, since he's such a non-entity in this movie outside of making the clone and digging up Superman's corpse, but no, that's fine. Just have the clone Superman do it while Lex sits around for most of the fucking movie. God, his voice actor's talent's wasted here. And that's about it for the story. Superman fights Doomsday and goes into his coma, and then the clone Superman kills time before Superman comes back and the two fight. The end. Roll credits. There's hardly anything of substance / worth here, and it basically comes off as a waste of time by the end of it. The source material, which already had some issues with it, is made even worse because of the compressed nature of this thing, resulting in numerous pacing issues where things are either too slow or too fast at points in this movie without a lot of balance between the two. Even the side plots with Jimmy and Lois aren't that interesting on their own because they ultimately go nowhere and they don't really add much to the characters, since by the end, things go back to normal with nothing to signify a change with their characters. Legit, this could have been cut out and not much would have changed. This is especially a problem when you consider this film is 75 minutes long. You gotta make those scenes count, especially if you're gonna adapt both storylines and don't want to bother extending the runtime or just make two movies about this. So because of the poor pacing, subplots that don't matter in terms of the character or story, since they get tossed aside by the end as if nothing happened, and keeping in things that drag the already compressed story down further, the story of Superman Doomsday is not that good as a result. The original storyline, as said previously, already had issues to it, but this adaptation does not do a good job fixing those issues. If anything, it just makes the story worse if I haven't made it clear already. But okay, the story is shit. How are the characters in this movie? Well, like the story, I think this element is also poorly handled. Superman exists. I can certainly say that. Legit, when they were portraying him as a god in some scenes, he was just doing the right thing. Maybe it's because other Superman movies give him more to deal with / grow from, but he's just okay in this movie. Doomsday also existed, but unlike Superman, he has nothing that makes him an interesting character, and instead just feels like a random obstacle obsessed with destruction that Superman has to stop. Sorry, but when it comes to villains, I prefer my villains with a bit more, I should say, character, than one who has less substance than a TV freaking dinner. Superman's supporting cast were just there, and as said earlier, their opportunities for development got thrown in the trash by the end, so it didn't amount to much, and the Superman clone was just not that good. I can see that they try to make him interesting since they combined the four Superman from Part two of the storyline into one, but he comes across as a frustrating to watch mess of a character. He's not interesting personality-wise, his chemistry with Lois and Lex is really weak sauce, and when he's not doing really stupid shit, he's parading around as this godlike figure that's above the law and humanity, and even Superman chews him out for that. But earlier in the movie, people like Lex were portraying Superman as the godlike figure, and even the funeral scene felt like it was the death of a godlike figure. So I just find it really funny that the film is portraying this godlike thing as a bad thing when they were doing it earlier and they weren't portraying it as evil and shit. It's like, what the fuck, movie? God, there was more of a parallel between Justice League Superman and Justice Lord Superman, and that was years prior to this. Oh, and speaking of the Justice Lords, Lex Luthor was also wasted in this movie. The most he contributes is making the clone Superman, and as said earlier, all he does after that is sit on his ass not doing anything. In other words, his role is to kill time, just like Jimmy and Lois in this movie. IKEA. For all your evil-sitting needs, this is the place for you. But hey, maybe the animation is good. After all, Bruce Timm is one of the people behind this movie, and he did a good job with animating the DC animated universe. So is it good? Yes and no. Well, I still like Bruce Timm's style, and it's shot decently and animated alright in terms of the movement itself. The coloring isn't my cup of tea, and I'm not a fan of a lot of the character designs. I mean, Superman looks like he's in his fucking 60s based on those odd marks on his face, and Lex looks like they were trying a bit too hard to be as threatening as the DCAU version, but I'm sorry, it just doesn't look like it based on this design. God, I may not like the art style for the All-Star Superman movie, but I'll take that version of Lex over this any day. Yes, the Lex with pouty lips is more intimidating than the one closer to the comic design. Hell, the Smallville version was more intimidating, and that was just Dawson's Creek with superpowers. Finally, we have audio, and honestly, there isn't much to say here. I already talked about how a lot of the characters were wasted here, so I would just say the same to their VAs as well, since their talents could have been better elsewhere. So I might as well just talk about the soundtrack itself, and really, it suffers a similar issue I found with the first Superman movie. The theme song is more memorable / overplayed than the rest of the soundtrack, which is just okay at best, especially when compared to that theme. So not only does it suffer from a song that overshadows the rest of the tunes are okay at best, and the theme is overplayed throughout this movie, which isn't a good idea in a movie that, again, is 75 minutes. And that's the nicest way I can put it, because this movie absolutely sucks. The story was terrible, the characters sucked, the animation was so-so, and the audio was just forgettable or a waste of the actor's talent. They had a decent opportunity to make an already slapped-together storyline much better, and they not only compressed it to make it even more slapped together, but they also made the story itself even worse than the source material. It resembles everything I don't like about a Superman story. Most of it's focused on fighting a big bad, treating Superman as a godlike figure when he has shown numerous times to be just as human as those on Earth, and making most of the characters, especially Superman, not mean much in terms of the overall story. But I think there's a silver lining to all this. With the release of the Death of Superman movie this year, fans of the storyline will no longer have to watch this crap in order to see this comic in animated form. Now, despite all my ranting, I'm still a fan of Superman, and I'll keep watching his movies whenever I get the chance because I still have a soft spot for the DC animated universe, especially for Superman and Batman. I will likely review the Death of Superman later this year, but for now, I'm David Grimm, and thanks for watching.